There is a treaty that survived 4 wars, 2 nuclear bombs pointed at each other, and 65 years of distrust between 2 armed neighbors. In April 2025, that treaty died. Weeks later, the gates of a dam in northern India closed, and the level of an entire river dropped on the other side of the border. Not a single shot was fired. No soldier crossed the line. And still, a country of 250 million people felt its neighbor's hand tightening around its throat. Water is more valuable than oil, and unlike oil, it cannot be transported at scale, cannot be substituted, and cannot be conquered by any army. You can occupy an oil field, you cannot occupy an aquifer, and in this video you will understand why the next era of geopolitics will not be fought with missiles, but with floodgates. January 20th, 2026, United Nations Headquarters, New York. A report is presented at the Secretary General's spokesperson podium, carrying a word that had never been used officially before: bankruptcy. The document declares that the world has left the era of water crisis and entered the era of global water bankruptcy, and the difference between those words is everything. Water stress is high pressure that can still be reversed. Crisis is an acute shock that can be overcome. Bankruptcy is when you have spent the entire savings account and there is no way to buy back what is gone. The report's author, researcher Kaveh Madani, deliberately used the language of finance. Humanity is no longer living off the planet's water interest. It is burning through the principle. Aquifers, glaciers, water tables that took thousands of years to fill. And the size of the bill is frightening. The economic value of water and freshwater ecosystems reaches $58 trillion a year, equivalent to 60% of the entire global economy. By 2050, nearly half of the planet's gross domestic product could sit in areas of high water risk. Today, that figure already passes 10%. 3 billion people live over water reserves that are shrinking, and entire cities, like Jakarta and Bangkok, are literally sinking because the ground beneath them has been drained. The report landed right in the week of Davos, among the planet's greatest fortunes. It generated panels, speeches, and polite applause, yet no market moved. The world was informed of its own bankruptcy and chose not to read the statement. Now go back to the treaty from the opening, because it is the most dangerous case on the planet. In 1960, with World Bank mediation, India and Pakistan divided the 6 rivers of the Indus Basin, 3 rivers for each side. The agreement survived the 1965 war. It survived the 1971 war. It survived the Kargil conflict in 1999, when both sides already had the atomic bomb. It survived all of them, until in April 2025, a terrorist attack in Kashmir left 26 dead, and India responded with a weapon no radar can detect. It placed the treaty in abeyance for the first time in history. India's foreign minister was direct. The treaty would stay suspended until Pakistan completely and irreversibly ends its support for cross-border terrorism. Islamabad responded by calling the suspension an act of war. To understand the desperation on the other side, 3 numbers suffice. 80% of Pakistan's arable land is irrigated by the Indus system. Agriculture supports about 2/3 of the population, and more than a quarter of the country's electricity is born in the hydropower plants on those rivers. Pakistan is, structurally, a dry country crossed by a river born outside its borders, and whoever controls that river's headwaters is exactly the country it has already fought 4 wars against. No tank needed, no aircraft needed. Just close the gate, and what happened after the suspension shows how this weapon works. Slowly, through documents, with no scene of war for the cameras. In January 2026, India unilaterally approved a major new hydropower project on one of the rivers that, under the treaty, should remain under its neighbor's control. In May, the Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled that the agreement imposes mandatory limits on how much India can impound. New Delhi's response fit in 2 words: null and void. For India, that court is illegitimate, and the treaty remains in abeyance for as long as what it calls Pakistani support for terrorism continues. On the other side, Pakistan's army chief warned at a formal dinner in Florida that any new dam would be destroyed with 10 missiles because the river, in his words, is nobody's private property. And here comes the detail that closes the circuit of fear. Upstream of Indian territory itself, China controls the headwaters of another major river in the region, and Beijing has already been publicly accused of using that position in Pakistan's favor. The country that closed its neighbor's tap discovered it also lives under one. In the geopolitics of water, every strangler has a strangler living upstream. Now cross the world to the most famous river in history. Egypt has 107 million inhabitants, and 93% of its territory is desert. All of Egyptian civilization, from pharaoh to skyscraper, is squeezed onto the banks of a single river, except the Nile does not rise in Egypt. And in September 2025, Ethiopia inaugurated, upstream, Africa's largest hydropower plant, a $5 billion dam with a reservoir bigger than the City of London. Its capacity holds 74 billion cubic meters of water. All of Egypt consumes about 55 billion a year. In other words, more than a full year of Egyptian consumption fits inside that single lake. And the detail that changes the board: Ethiopia built it without asking permission, financed by its own people, with bonds bought by citizens and companies, breaking ground in 2011, exactly when Egypt was mired in revolution. Cairo pressured, Washington pressured, and the dam was inaugurated anyway, because in the physics of a river there is a rule no diplomacy can overturn. Whoever is upstream decides first. Egypt has already cut rice production, already drilled more than 5,000 wells, already built the largest water treatment plant in the world. But nothing replaces a river born on foreign soil. If you think this is a poor country's problem, look at the river that built the American West. The Colorado supplies tens of millions of people. Without it, there is no Phoenix, no Las Vegas, no agriculture filling California's shelves. And the river is dying with no external enemy. Snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, the source of everything, fell to just a quarter of its historical average. The source itself is failing. Underground, the toll is even worse. The basin lost nearly 28 million acre-feet of groundwater in just over 2 decades. That is equivalent to emptying the largest reservoir in the entire United States, except from a vault that does not refill. Arizona has already lost 18% of its water allocation for the 3rd year in a row. Mexico, which has received water under a 1944 treaty, also gets less. And the federal rules governing the entire river expire in 2026, with no ready agreement to replace them. There is no border villain here. There is a civilization built on a false assumption that there would be infinite water inside a desert. The reckoning does not come from an army. It comes from the source itself. And if anyone still doubts that people already die over water, there is a place where this stopped being theory. The Fergana Valley in Central Asia, where 3 countries born of the Soviet collapse squeeze onto the same rivers. Geography set a perfect trap. The upstream countries, with mountains and glaciers, want to dam the water to generate electricity. The downstream countries need it flowing free to irrigate the cotton and wheat that sustain their populations. In the Soviet era, a central authority decided who got what. When the Soviet Union collapsed, what remained were poorly resolved borders and opposing interests over the same tap. In April 2021, a dispute over a water intake facility turned into gunfire, leaving more than 50 dead. In September 2022, a new clash on the same border, this time with tanks, artillery, and armed drones, killed more than 100. In March 2025 came a historic border agreement, with protocols even for operating hydropower plants, a real step toward peace. But in June 2026, a Jamestown Foundation analysis was blunt. The scarcity had grown too severe to be solved by sharing agreements alone. Translating diplomatic language, The paperwork cannot keep up with the physics. The water is running out faster than the ink on the signatures can dry. There is still a third way to lose water, and it needs neither war nor drought. In the Ogoniland region of Nigeria, entire communities drink from wells where a carcinogenic agent appears at concentrations far above the safe limit, 900 times above the standard. The water coming out of there is more poison than liquid, and it did not end up that way by accident. An Anglo-Dutch oil giant operated in the region for 35 years and left behind more than 120 recorded spills since 1989. In 2024 alone, Nigeria recorded 589 new oil spills, each one reaching streams, water tables, and fishing grounds. The cleanup promised more than a decade ago remains only on paper. The communities took the case to British courts and won in 2025 what Amnesty International called a final chance at justice. But even if they win outright, there is something no court can give back. A poisoned aquifer does not accept compensation. Dead water does not come back with a verdict. And that is what this case teaches the rest of the planet. You can lose water forever without a single shot ever being fired. Now put together the four boards: the Indian subcontinent, the Nile, the Colorado, and the Nigerian Delta. None of them is about a lack of rain. All of them are about who has a hand on the gate. From the Indus Basin comes the first principle. You do not need to invade anyone. You just need to control the headwaters. From the Nile comes the second. Whoever is upstream decides first, and no treaty overrules gravity. From Nigeria comes the third, the most definitive one. Water that dies does not come back. And that is what sets water apart from every other strategic resource. Oil has a substitute, transport, a stockpile. Water is local by nature, and when it runs out where you live, no import can save an entire city. The UN declared the bankruptcy, and the financial comparison hides a cruel difference. A bank's bankruptcy has a bailout, a rescue, the printing of money. There is no printing of water. There is no emergency package for an aquifer that took thousands of years to fill. The UN's own projections show between 2 and 3 billion people already facing scarcity for at least 1 month a year, and nearly half the global economy in high water risk zones by 2050. This is not the distant future. It is the decade you are living in right now. You can occupy an oil field. You cannot occupy an aquifer, or a glacier, or a rain cloud. And when a treaty that withstood atomic bombs cannot withstand the era of water bankruptcy, the message is clear. We have entered territory humanity has never set foot in, and no one in any capital in the world yet knows how to get out of it. That is the most honest thing this channel can tell you.